in community-led housing. And I hope you're as excited as I am about this session. Thank you very much to Wales Cooperative Centre and Communities Creating Homes for inviting me to chair what I'm hoping and I'm sure will be a really, really fascinating and interesting session. So just to go through what we're going to do today, we're going to have four speakers really, but in 3 sessions. If you have any questions as the speakers are presenting or talking, please stick them in the chat as we go along. But we'll have a Q&A session at the end after everyone is finished. And I think you've noticed that this session is being recorded. So I hope everyone is okay with that. You can keep your cameras on or off. That's up to you. But I'll just remind everyone to keep your mics muted when the speakers are talking. So many of you will probably know what Tai Pawb is, but for those of you who don't know, we are an organisation that works to advance equality and social justice in housing in Wales. We're a membership organisation with all housing associations as our members in Wales, local authority, housing divisions, community organisations, equality organisations, other umbrella bodies. Our vision is Wales where everybody has a right to a good home, and we work on that. We strive to realise that vision through campaigning, influencing, working with policymakers, but also working on the ground with our members. So we're all about a diversity, culture and inclusion, hence my absolute delight to be chairing this session today and really learning more about the work that these 4 fantastic people and groups are doing in their respective places. And what an inspiration they are. Here are the people that are turning what my organisation talks about into reality on the ground in a very, very tangible sense, with their heads, hands and hearts. Last week, some of you will know we held our annual conference and we had a fantastic speaker, Leilani Farhas, who is a former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing. Our campaign Back the Bill calls for making good housing and human rights in Wales. And one of the things that Leilani said is I think, very pertinent to what we're discussing today. She quite often says that as well, that governments across the globe are too slow and apprehensive really about putting brave solutions in, like human rights, to tackle housing crisis, because housing is seen as very much a commodity rather than social good, and we sort of all got used to it. And therefore the crisis that we see seems like an unsurmountable behemoth of an issue, because so much finance and so much of our thinking is used to seeing housing as something that can't be made into social good or can't be seen like that. But in looking for solutions, government should look first and foremost to communities, to people on the ground, because the solutions are already there. And I think that really stayed with me, engagement and looking at what people are doing, what solutions they're putting in, locally, regionally, nationally, is a really, really important part of rights-led approach to housing. And community-led housing is certainly one of them. What Leilani often says as well, and what she did repeat at our conference, is that human rights turn people from passive recipients of charity to active subjects. And isn't community-led housing a perfect example of this? Groups of amazing people come together to create and to work on a solution for themselves. So today we'll hear from the 4 fantastic speakers on how community-led housing can be a possibility and a solution for communities which are bound together by many things, but shared characteristics and shared places. And these communities, as we know, are experiencing particular barriers or challenges when it comes to good housing and living with dignity and peace and security, really. We know that LGBT young people are 5 times as likely to experience homelessness. We know that harassment and hate crime are at all-time high. I'm not sure whether anyone has seen recent reports, but homophobic hate crime has tripled in the past 6 years, and trans hate crime, transphobic hate crime has quadrupled in the last 6 years. And in Wales specifically, we know that home and places around home is the second most likely place for hate crime to happen. And nowhere is it more hurtful and damaging than when it happens around your house. Black and Asian and ethnic minority people, TAIPAUB has been part of First Minister's advisory group on COVID and the effect we know, about the disproportionate effect it had on Black and Asian and ethnic minority communities. And that group has produced a report, and the report, once again, I must say, highlighted that overcrowding is a real issue, and it's contributed to, to what's happened with COVID and to that disproportionate impact it had. We know that people live in worse housing conditions in general. People of color experience stigma, not only around their race, but also related to living in social housing, especially. We've just had research from TPAS Cymru, which showed us that, and much more strongly so than other social tenants. They're not as listened to as other communities and live in insecure private rented sector. That's much more likely. I mean, older people, where do I start really on the housing challenges there? Older people, we know there's more likelihood that people will be disabled and have specific health conditions as people grow older, which warrant really good accessible housing. But what we're experiencing is what EHRC previously called a hidden housing crisis, and we've done a lot of work on that in TAIPAUB. So there are some real issues around lack of accessible housing, around adaptation systems and so on. But of course, not everyone is disabled and is experiencing health issues. And what we really see is a lack of options, good housing options where older people can live in security, peace and dignity. And isolation is a real issue, and haven't we all learned about the importance of communities and of a sense of togetherness in the past sort of 18 months or so. So community-led housing has so much to offer here. So I'm really, really excited to introduce our first speaker, who's Maria Brenton. Maria is a UK Co-Housing Network Senior Co-Housing Ambassador and a trustee of UK Co-Housing Trust. And for many years, she has worked with OWCH, that's how you pronounce it, Older Women's Co-Housing Group, who at the end of 2016 moved into Newground Co-Housing in North London. And it is the UK's first senior co-housing community. She's been described by various people in various sources as combining academic rigor of research with a real passion and commitment to helping other people realize their ambitions for senior co-housing. So what an amazing example of a person who combines and uses their expertise to help people realize their aspirations, and how you can use that knowledge really to advocate as well for co-housing as a way of living and as a solution to the many challenges that we face as a society. So from working in the NHS and academia to helping turn dreams into reality, there's no stronger advocate for co-housing for older people than Maria. And without further ado, Maria, you can take over.
Thank you for that introduction. I might add that my most of my working life was teaching at the University of Cardiff. So I have a very strong affinity with Wales. Let me just pick up my slides. Whoops, here we go.
It'll probably take a while to load.
I'm not finding a share.
It says that you have started screen sharing, but we can't actually see your screen.
Let me see.
I want to try again. Try again, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, they've kind of disappeared on me and they were working before. That's strange. It's just, let me get rid of that.
It's really frustrating when these buttons move around and you can never find them.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try logging in on a different laptop, Maria, and see if I can share them for you.
Right, I might have got them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Ooh, there we are, we can see it.
Oh, good. Right. Wow, that was, so here I am, that's me. And the more important bit is who this is. This is OWCH, the Older Women's Co-Housing Group. Not a lot of ethnic diversity there, you will recognize. That's something that we haven't really been able to achieve. There are no black or brown faces there. In the sort of waiting room, we have specifically sought people from ethnic minorities, but we didn't get them into this group for all kinds of reasons. Actually, there's a great deal of diversity in this group. Certainly in terms of age range, there's a 36-year age span here from about the mid-50s to the early 90s. So it's intergenerational, would you believe? There's a fair amount of physical disability. There's some mental illness. There's different sexual orientation. And we have 2 Iranian refugees who are permanent members of the community as well. So this is the group at the first, the official opening in end of 2016. So they've been living there for 5 years now. The other group that I'm listed as working with, I have been working with, is the London Older Lesbian Co-Housing Group. They're a group of women who are coming along after OWCH, actually trying to emulate what we did. Certainly, they're behind us in time, but they're a lot more savvy and clued up than we ever were. But they are standing on our shoulders. They've been learning from us. They've been coming over and having training sessions and whatnot. They will motor ahead compared with us. We started when nobody knew what co-housing was. Certainly local authorities didn't know and didn't want to know. And we had a lot of difficulty getting to this point. So the achievement is something to be kind of reckoned with. We're a form of community-led housing, co-housing, that is basically an intentional community. The whole point of going in for community-led housing in this way is that you want to design a community rather than just get affordable homes or whatever. And intentional community is reflected in both the physical architecture of the building and in the social architecture of the group itself, in terms of its self-management and its working groups and its decision-making methods through consensus. It is so far removed from the model that this group were escaping from, which was institutional care or sheltered housing or any of the institutional models that exist in the welfare state for older people. The group wanted to evade a situation where they lost choice and participation. They wanted to stay in charge of their own lives. So one is that co-housing is about an intentional community, and second, it is based on core values. The group OWCH worked quite a long time on agreeing their values, and everyone who moves in there is committed to those values, however different they are. And those are mainly about tolerance and respect for the individual, the agreement to share responsibility, to collaborate, and to give each other mutual support. Now, in terms of the purpose of your conference, I think it is to focus in on the different groups around Wales who may not be geographically located. And there's a parallel here that I want to bring your attention to, because one of the difficulties that we had back in the end of the 90s with being a London-wide group, in other words, a network, that women came from all over London, at least 12 or 14 different boroughs, was that local authorities found us difficult to grapple with. Understandably, and particularly in London, where local authorities have large waiting lists for housing and huge waiting lists of families living in temporary accommodation, they're not all that keen to allow any finance for social housing to go to people who don't live within their local authority areas. That was one of the difficulties we had in London that may happen in Wales. I hope not now, but we had 32 local authorities to relate to. I forget how many there are in Wales now, but it is quite difficult to be an all Wales group, like a lesbian group or a this or that group, and expect a local authority to welcome you. In terms of the physical architecture, it was one of the great strengths of our group was that we were able in the beginning to participate in the design with the architects. They were great. And you can see from this slide that we had workshops aimed at designing the whole place, and had quite an influence as a group in shaping the eventual community that we ended up in. The next slide will show what the result of that was. This is a drawing of how the building is as it currently was built. And designing this for the group was a huge shot in the arm. I mean, the architect said to us, we're the ones holding the pencil, not you, but we want your views and your ideas and your wishes. And we ended up with a rather beautiful building that is age-proofed. 25 flats, 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom, a mix of tenures, 17 leaseholders and 8 social rental. So a mix there, and wonderful spacious flats, all ready to for anyone in a wheelchair or whatever, every one of them, plus some communal facilities. Moving on to further on to this, this is my favorite slide. This shows some of the women who look as if they're participating in building the place, but they weren't. And we were allowed in at intervals during the construction, and there was a degree of personalization of people's flats. Not a huge amount, but what they've ended up with, they've been happy with, which is this, with lovely large balconies that are almost an extra room, or patios. The place has grown up, and the whole garden has grown up, so you can hardly see the building now, but I put this early slide in so you get a sense of the building. And the design was worked on with the architects, but the whole place was forward financed by a housing association, by Hanover. And I mean, we're really grateful for the fact that they front funded it, because we could not have raised the capital at that time to build it ourselves. They were on a learning path and we were on a learning path of co-production. I don't think they or we got it entirely right. Co-production, partnership. Housing associations are very unused, it seems to me, to working with their end users or even thinking about them until they get to the point where they want them to buy what they've built. And the partnership of co-production is something that really is important in establishing the autonomy of a group at grassroots level. The LOLT group is doing far better than we were with the London and Quadrant Housing Association, who so far have been wonderful in terms of working in equal partnership with the London Older Lesbian Community Group. I think what my time is, I think I've probably near the end now. I'd happily respond to questions on this. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to say, except that one of the things I would point out that this group is a mix, apart from one couple of women, are all singles. And the membership basis for a group of all singles is quite different from the other co-housing communities based on families around the country. And because they need each other more, basically, and because as they get older, they need the security of friendly, helpful neighbors that they really can rely on. And so getting into this group, there hasn't actually been any turnover yet in the 5 years, but getting into this group as a member is probably a more protracted process than into most co-housing groups. There's a long period where you are a non-residential member with a buddy in the group. You're invited to all kinds of things like communal meals, help with the garden, parties, and that kind of thing. But when there is a vacancy, well, when you want to become a member, you have to apply formally with an application and be interviewed. And then a recommendation goes to the whole group to see whether they agree that you really do subscribe to the values of the group and are going to be a compatible and friendly neighbor. So that can be a bit tight, and we haven't really tested it yet because everyone's living too long. And as I said, there has been no turnover since 5 years ago. And at the end of this year, they're celebrating their 5 years and doing a review of how they've been living and looking forward to the next 5 years. So I'm going to stop my sharing there and hope I come back to you.
Thank you so much, Maria. I think you brought it to life with showing us all those photos. I'm sure it's a fruit of a very long labor.
It was a bit disconcerting because I couldn't see the Zoom screen and I didn't know if I was talking to myself all this time.
Here we are. I'm
sure the relief.
I'm sure people are listening intensely and they'll have loads of questions for you. What a fantastic project, and I'm really keen to learn more about it, really. I mean, in particular, I know that there are different models of financing community-led housing, but you spoke about co-production, and it's something that is we're very interested in. So there's probably a lot of lessons to be learned on various areas on how we work together. But it looks amazing. Thank you very much for sharing that. So our next speakers are Jane Stageman and Susan Phillips, who are two fantastic women behind Pride of Place in Leeds. Pride of Place Living is a multi-generational community-led LGBTQ housing in Leeds, or it will be. It's in the stages of development. And Pride of Place Living will be located in Leeds and will be an exciting LGBTQ plus housing scheme. It's part of a larger project, Pride of Place Leeds, which also has Pride of Place Cultural and Community Space as part of that, which is another arm of that project. So I'm really looking forward to finding out more about it. They're planning to develop 70 homes units, and they are looking at multi-generational living environment with a mixture of different types of homes and tenures to suit different ages and care needs as well, if people have those. So housing for a number of LGBTQ plus families as well, and younger people at risk of homelessness. And that is certainly a big issue here in Wales. So they're really focusing on you know, not just building, but quite a lot of other aspects that are really, really important to people's lives, as are all community-led housing projects. Intergenerational peer support, increasing safety, and reducing loneliness and isolation. But I'll stop talking now. I'll hand over to Jane and Susan to tell us more about that project, Pride of Place.
Okay, I'm going to start. I'm going to try and screen share. If I could have permission, please.
Go ahead.
It says it's disabled for me.
It's disabled. Huma, you might want to make Susan co-host or host.
Should be done now, Susan.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Susan, and I'm going to talk to you first, and then my colleague Jane's going to take over. I'm one of the original founders of what was then called Project Freedom, and has been renamed Pride of Place Leeds. And as you've already heard a little bit about us, we have 3 different elements to our work: Pride of Place Living, which is the accommodation; Pride of Place Space, which is looking at a community centre of some sort, a centre of some sort for Leeds LGBTQ plus community; and Pride of Place Care, which is looking at how to offer LGBTQ plus friendly care. So today we're going to talk about Pride of Place Living, of which Jane's the chair, so she's going to give you some more detail. But just to give you the background, in 2016, Leeds City Council funded a project called the LGBT Mapping Group to look at what resources there were in Leeds and what gaps there were for the LGBTQ plus communities. And a really good scoping exercise was done. And 2 of the things that came out of that were the need for housing and the need for a centre of some sort. So based on that work, in 2018, a very small group of Project Freedom founders did some focus groups with older people around housing need, and also a survey to find out what Leeds LGBTQ plus communities were thinking. And out of that really came the development of the idea of a centre based within housing. Whether or not that's achievable, we have no idea, but that would be a dream. And also came the idea of it being multi-generational rather than just looking at housing for older LGBTQ plus people. Jane will talk more about a survey that we've done this year. So we were originally constituted as Project Freedom in 2020 and as Pride of Place earlier this year in 2021. And our vision is to enable the creation of a vibrant, sustainable LGBT community in central Leeds, where people can live, work and enjoy life independently through accommodation and a centre. The features of the dream housing scheme, I say dream because it's not happened yet. We are in initial early talks with a housing association, but they are initial early talks. And that's a housing association that has a site near Leeds City Centre and is looking at what possible developments they'll make of that site. But it's a large site with an intention to build quite a lot of high rise on it. We're thinking of a mix of tenures and that it be multi-generational with an emphasis on the over 50s, because LGBTQ plus people of the older generations in particular do experience a lot of isolation, usually not having their own, or often not having their own birth families, often being already disengaged from their peer family, their own families, but at the peer level. So they are very reliant on the families that they choose, the families of choice. And of course, as you get older, you lose some of those. So we're looking at upwards of 70 units. So it's very different from a community-led housing that is a group of 20 people wanting to live together. In fact, some of us, most of us who are actively involved at the moment are not necessarily intending to live there. We just see a really big need for our communities. So we want to look at what is financially viable to be able to provide care and extra care, as well as some space for families, but particularly space for young people, because we know the homelessness issues are massive for young LGBTQ plus people. Whether or not we'll achieve what our dreams are, we don't know, but we're aiming in that direction and working very hard at it. We've got a fantastic group of people working on it. If you know people in Leeds, LGBT people who want to get involved, we're always looking for more because there's so much to do, always so much to do. Obviously, one of our key issues here is that it be a fully accessible and adaptable build. And we like OWCH want to be involved in the development of the design to ensure that it works for us to have lifelong accommodation that is very adaptable. So Jane, do you want to go next?
Yeah, lovely. Hello, everybody. Pleased to meet you all. Just on the previous slide, you'll see that we actually, one of the first things we've done since identifying ourselves a pride of place living is to develop a prospectus around exactly those features that Susan's just described. And we did that actually with the help of a grant that we got from the community and facilitated with community-led housing people with the expertise in the area who worked with us as a group to take us through a number of the things that we needed to do to actually understand exactly what we wanted to achieve in terms of our organisation and getting us strong enough and in a good place. I think that's quite important, perhaps people venturing on this for the first time, that there is some help available, and we certainly participated in it. So we produced the prospectus at the end of last year, December 2020. And actually we made a point of getting engaged with the local authority. I know Maria talked about it. We were very fortunate in Leeds that we're talking with one local authority, and we made a point of trying to talk with the councillors that had the responsibility for the areas, the portfolios that were particularly important, like housing, development, economy, and to check that they were kind of on our side as we moved forward. And we got a very positive response. And as a result of that, the council sent out our prospectus to all the 40 registered providers, housing associations that they were dealing with across Leeds and the surrounding area. And that was really positive. So it came, with a supportive approach actually. And as a result of that, as Susan said, we've had a housing association, a couple wrote to us and said, we'd have loved to have joined you, but we're already engaged. But we've got one now, as I say, that we're beginning to work with at early stages. So that was important. Having done that, and we are in a very different position to Maria's, it sounds like, with the older people's housing. We didn't have a set group. We are dealing with the whole LGBT community, and we're very keen that they keep engaged and we have them on side with us along this process. Because we don't know at the end of the day who is actually going to, actually want to live there. So we wanted to make sure there was enough people wanting to live there if we wanted to go forward. So the next thing we did, as Susan said, at the beginning of this year, between January and March 2021, we actually had another survey that went out. It was in a time of COVID, so we couldn't do it in person in any way, so we did it online, and we worked quite hard through all our connected LGBT community groups to actually make sure that they sort of pushed it and encouraged people to participate. And we were really delighted that we got 556 respondents, 95 of who identified themselves as not heterosexual, and nearly 20%, 19% as trans or non-binary, and a good proportion of Black and Brown residents in line with the ONS statistics in terms of representation, and actually above the ONS statistics in terms of the numbers with disabilities. So we did feel we got a good source really for our response to our survey. And of course, the question we wanted was, well, who's interested in living here? And as you can see on the slide, we did get 63% of those people saying, yes, we do, we're really interested, or we want more information about this if it's to be here in Leeds. So that was fantastic. And we also got them to talk about the sorts of things that they would be important in terms of the housing scheme that was particularly to be LGBTQ plus affirmative. And I'll come on to that in a moment in our next slide. I suppose what I would say is, although the majority of the people who in that 63%, across the whole respondents that replied and said they wanted to move in, the majority said it would be when they were over 65 or in care. But there was some differences in the data that it was really interesting, I think, that trans and non-binary people wanted to move in earlier at 25 to 34. Black and brown people wanted to move in between 55 and 64, disabled between 45 and 54. And I think, that perhaps relating to what Alicia said at the beginning, the level of oppression and discrimination and potentially hate crime may be different across the communities as well because of the multiplicity of oppressions that people are facing. So, that has to be recognised, I think. And of course is extremely important in terms of what's the sort of community that we're trying to create. And the sorts of reasons I think that people gave were for wanting to be in it were very much what, again, Alicia said at the beginning: safety, security, wanting to explore identity within a safe environment, wanting to pass down history, community and pride when you haven't got that from any other situation. So there's some really interesting reasons, I think, why people feel that they would like to be there. And everybody, well, 96% were positive about it being multi-generational, which is really interesting, I think. And that's why we're absolutely committed to see whether that's a possibility within this, this housing scheme. So moving on to slide 2. Thank you, Susan. Just to say, we have got a report of the survey, so people are interested. And this is some of just on the design side, what came out of it. Perhaps no surprises, but these were things that were stressed. Obviously, the mix of tenures, it supported it, predominantly 2-bed flats, independence, care needs, and obviously very important, a clear ethos and code of conduct about mutual respect within the community, recognising the intersectionality of the community as well, I think. And staff needing to be trained or particularly understanding the needs of LGBTQ plus communities. So those were some of the things that particularly came out of it. What that's been really useful in terms of beginning to give some ideas. And we have developed a design brief in our early conversation with the Housing Association, pulling on this survey. And actually there were some key themes that we felt came out of it. One was actually about safety and solidarity. Secondly, living environment. And thirdly, accessibility were some of the things that kept being mentioning through the comments. And we've now actually going out to do a second set of workshops now, more detailed workshops with the community about what that means in real design terms. So to take those ideas now into real working with architects, a bit like Maria said, but of course we're working with a much broader group at the moment to see how that will translate into real ideas into what this housing scheme would look and feel like. And so that's our next stage. And we're going to do that alongside working with the Housing Association, so we can keep feeding in ideas as we move through it over the next year. And we hope that will make sure that that is really responsive as an approach to what we want to do. So I think our big challenge now is a bit around the finance, and obviously getting the financial side of it sorted, and we're seeking help and funding to help us. We need some financial expertise. We're looking and connecting with other housing cooperative schemes to understand how they're approaching that, but we know that we've really got to do some work on that side of the thing to make this a bit more of a reality. But we're very hopeful and very excited, and as Susan said, think this will be a wonderful scheme within the city. And we hope, it's something that, again, we can share experiences across the country. I'd love to talk to you in Wales if we move forward, both about how we've approached it, but also about how it develops. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane and Susan. What a fantastic vision and a fantastic purpose. I think it's particularly great, for me personally, to see that that people are coming together and wanting to creating something that is so inclusive and recognizes the intersectional characteristics of people in times when members of LGBTQ community are being pitted against each other, really. So it's like a beacon of positive shining light, really, for all of us. It's absolutely great. Thank you so much. Okay, so last but certainly not least, our next speaker is Claude Hendrickson. I think first thing that I did when Hugh told me about Claude was to have a look on online and have a look at his work. And there's a great YouTube video on Claude's work back in was it 90s, I think. One of the videos shows Claude working with a group of 12 African Caribbean men in Chapeltown in Leeds, literally building themselves out of being badly housed and unemployed. And one of the things that Claude says in that video is very significant, I think. He says we have streets full of empty, boarded up houses doing nothing while people are living 3 or 4 to a bedroom. And this is what inspired us to do this. And 20, 30 years on, for many people, things haven't really changed that much, if you think about it. And for many, things have gotten worse. 70s and 80s were really just the start of the sort of commodification of housing that led to where we are today. As I mentioned, I think before, Black and brown people in Wales are much more likely to be homeless, same as across the UK, much more likely to live in insecure private rented sector and bad housing conditions, really. And overcrowding statistics, quite shocking. Well, not shocking, because we all know about it and we all ought to do something about it. But in Wales, nearly 30% of Bangladeshi and 20% of Black people live in overcrowded housing, compared to 4.9% of white British and Welsh people, but there are beacons of hope. So apart from supporting a range of projects in the past and now, Claude is now, as I understand, working on research which will show how community-led housing could be a solution and is a solution for many Black, Asian, ethnic minority people. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Claude.
Thank you for that, Alicia, introduction. I'm going to share a screen as well now. I wasn't going to at first, but I see that I better keep up the level of presentation. What I will say before, what I will say, you know, they were two brilliant presentations, and for me, today it's a 20-odd year journey for me, because I started out in 88 with this idea of giving people the opportunity to not solve the housing issue, but actually be part of the solution rather than the problem. And when I go through my slides, I'll touch on some of them issues. What I'd like to kick off and say is that originally when I kicked off, I came back to the sector and I was trained as an advisor. I was the BAME and LGBT and minority groups advisor. Now I'm the equality, diversity and inclusion advisor, because what I realized, when it comes to diversity, a lot of us in this room will have maybe different opinions on what we class as diversity. Diversity and inclusion, different people have different perceptions, but what I'm looking at across, even within the minority groups, there are Black and ethnic minorities. So whether they're gays and lesbians, there's Black and ethnic minorities. Whether there's people with disability, there's Black and ethnic minorities. If they're women fleeing domestic violence, there's Black and ethnic minorities within them minority groups. So to me, I'm looking at across all strands that to ensure that equality, diversity and inclusion is included, but make sure we don't lose that race element. So I just wanted to kick that off, because sometimes when you hear the word diversity, you get people so in a box that they just see their diversity. The diversity might be just making sure more women are involved, but I just wanted to throw that out. Let me go to share the screen. I hope it works for me. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it, Claude.
Okay, I'm just going to take you on a little bit of my journey, as I mentioned, and Alicia mentioned. Frontline Self Build was set up back in 1988, where a group of us who were unemployed and badly housed wanted to utilize doing a community-led housing project to give us skills, more than just building houses, but actually give us skills, give us, back then they were saying that Black men were lazy, we were drug dealers, we didn't want to work. And this gave us an opportunity to break that stereotypical view of Black men. So I was the founder, pulled a group of people, Black men I knew. Some of them had been in trouble in the past. Some of them had just been unemployed, couldn't get employment no matter what because of institutional issues. Anyway, we built a street of houses, 92,000 bricks, 52,000 blocks, 7,000 roof tiles. We built 12 two-bedroom semi-detached houses. And 25 years on, you can see in the bottom picture what they look like. And back then, I really hoped that when I did the project, that it would be a catalyst to help other disadvantaged communities in the city of Leeds. And you've heard Susan and Jane talk about Leeds and Leeds City Council. And yes, Leeds City Council have been, or individuals within Leeds City Council have been positive ambassadors for community-led housing. So yeah, Leeds has a quite a strong base. Again, back in 2000, in the 80s, my inspiration came from a project that was in Bristol, a project called Zanzili, where a group of young men who lived in Bristol had done a block of flats in Bristol, and I'd seen that on TV, so I used that as my catalyst. A lady called Stella Clark, who had a brother that worked, that was a Conservative MP, was actually, I call her the queen of self-build, because back there she was the one that came up with the idea that this could be done by young black men. And in 2000, sorry, they formed the Community Self-Build Agency, again, which over the years has done 178 self-build projects across the UK, some 1,200 housing units, and that's from 2000 to 2015. So sometimes when they talk about self-build and inverted commas community-led housing, it has a good history, some really positive stories. In 2010, Stella Clark was introduced to Major Ken Hames, MBE, who was an ex-SAS officer, and who made her aware of the plight of homeless ex-servicemen. So from 2010 to about 2016, we did quite a number of projects around supporting homeless ex-servicemen, and building a veteran self-built arm of the charity, because and I didn't know at the time that something like 60% nationally of all homeless men out there are actually ex-veterans who'd served for the country but fallen on their luck, could not integrate back into society. I mean, that number changes around the country, but I'm just giving you my journey. So 2010, I was part of that group. In 2012, I became the Community Self-Build Agency Northern Director, which gave me the opportunity to be able to lobby Leeds City Council, because I've been banging the drum for self-build or self-help housing or community-led housing for since the late 80s. Anyway, in Leeds, so I managed to get the Community Self-Build Agency, or I managed to get Leeds City Council to commission me to produce a 10-year self-build strategy, again, because we wanted to contribute to help solving the crisis, the housing crisis they continue to talk about. And when I talk about that in Leeds, they need to build something like, I think it's 50,000 houses over the next preceding 10 years. And I was commissioned to write a 10-year strategy, where in that strategy, what I did was, go back one. What I did within that strategy, I'll give you an example. We had 50,000 houses to build. I put a strategy together that said community-led housing could do 30 houses per year for the next 10 years. So out of that 50,000 houses, that would be 300 houses that would be community-led, self-build, empty homes, whichever it was. And so that would leave 49,700 that could be done the traditional way, So we were not going to compete with housing suppliers, whether it was local authority or housing association. We were going to do a minute. So you can imagine You know, we do 300 over the next 10 years. You do 49,700. In Leeds, we're fortunate. In Leeds, we're fortunate to have a very strong community-led housing kind of sector. Since I did Frontline in the 80s, projects like Latch, Canopy, Gypsel, and the Lilac project, which happened in 2016, which is like a flagship kind of community housing project. And right now in Leeds, as we speak, we've got a co-housing project. So it was good to hear the lady at the front end talk about co-housing. We have a Chaco co-housing on site right now, building 29 houses, due to be open and in March of next year. So Leeds over the last 20 years has developed a good community-led housing base that I feel sometimes we can be a good example to other cities on the different tenure, because Canopy, Gypsel and Latch have done a lot around bringing empty homes back into use, using local people to do that. So Leeds has a good history of community-led projects. As I said, I joined Leeds Community Homes as the BAME and LGBT advisor originally. Now I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Associate. In 2020, January 2020, I became the first black male to be accredited under a program that has been launched by the cooperative housing, to become the first accredited community-led advisor, black male. My role is to get more black people and minority groups involved in the sector. I accredited on something like the 10th of January, and 2 months later we went into lockdown in March 2020. So it was, you know, it's been a bit of an experience. But moving on, when I was employed under the Cohesive Communities funding, which was given through the Leeds Land Trust Network, with a brief, and my brief was the most important goal of the project was to encourage more minority groups, Black, Asian, LGBT plus Q, disabilities, and to be more involved in the sector, and to achieve equality, diversity, and help Leeds Community Homes achieve its equality, diversity ambitions. To build new and refurbished homes, to create employment and enterprise within the city and the region, to develop a strategy for homelessness, for homeless people to be more involved, and to support newly migrated and who are documented people to get homes. So within that work, obviously that cohesive community work, it started to mushroom out other issues that were evident within the sector. Not just that, and I heard Jane talk about it, not just about diversity around race, but diversity, what came out, it was evident LGBT, people with disability, women fleeing domestic violence, ex-offenders, veterans could be engaged within this sector. But what I noticed was that, and me and a young man from Nottingham called Henry Baptiste, who I met on the advisor training, we noticed that everywhere we went, we were still like many meetings I go to, I'm still the only black face in the room. Whether it's the National Hubs Network has 26, 27 hubs across the UK. Not one of them is led by a black person, a person of colour. Projects that we often hear about, not many of them are led by a person of colour. And we were wondering why, because the community land trust philosophy comes out of the civil rights movement in America. So community land trust was born out of the civil rights movement in America and moved into Europe. I did a project back in '88. I know Zanzili was done with '89. Zanzili was done in '88. I know there was a project in Birmingham that was done in the early '90s. I know there was projects in London. So my question was, well, where are the people of color within the sector? They don't seem to have risen to the top. So we wanted to look at, and we've been commissioned by, well, Power to Change has contributed to this research. We've now got contributions from the Community Land Trust Network. We've got contributions from some of the hubs. So we've raised enough money. We're just making sure we've got an academic partner, and we will be using Liverpool, Tom Moore from Liverpool to be our academic partner. And what we want to do is look, and what I want to be openly clear about is when I say black led, it doesn't mean only for black people. It's about why can't there be a black led person that's helping mixed people, all kinds of people. It's not, this research is not just about black people. It's about why are there no black leaders within the sector when, you know, when we've contributed to the sector. So, and Black Lives Matters, what's happened with Black George Floyd only proves to highlight this, what the disparities report has highlighted, this COVID has highlighted, and a few of the earlier speakers have mentioned, and Alicia mentioned that ethnic minorities always seem to be an afterthought. And I constantly say, they often say that black and ethnic minority people, and I'm watching the time, are hard to reach. And I say, no, we have been easy to ignore for many years. We are not hard to reach. We're easy to ignore. We've been ignored. Anyway, let's go through the research and what the research is looking at. The research objectives: to examine structural barriers for minority-led organizations and community accessing pathways to affordable rented homes. Review organizational approaches to enable these communities to be involved and to look at the related bodies. So we're not just looking at community-led projects, we're looking at how the funding is distributed. We're looking at how community-led housing is promoted. And I do accept that in rural settings and urban settings, diversity is looked at different. So I do accept with some of the people that push back from rural areas that says, well, there ain't any ethnic minorities in our area, so that's why there's none either leading or in projects. But one of the things I'm pushing is that every single organization that's doing community-led housing should have an equality and diversity policy. Yeah, that is every organization, and I'm hoping eventually that funders will be asking projects that present themselves, do you have an equality, diversity and inclusion policy? And even if it's not up to date, you should have a policy. It should be a starting point, how you prove you're inclusive and you look at diversity. To what we want to do within this is, this will explore existing policy as well as propose changes in policy, strategy resulting in increased urgency and a priority as a result of COVID and Black Lives Matters. To survey government offices, as I've mentioned, local authorities, intermediary and funding organisations within the community-led housing sector, on the way issues are perceived and addressed. This will include current practice. And I can make this presentation available for you. To review the take-up of community-led models, definitions of community-led housing and how it accesses, how it might disproportionately impact on Black and ethnic minorities. So they're the, in principle, research objectives. Again, to identify opportunities for transformation, to deliver a report on how the sector operates, to draw out evidence that impacts, to highlight good practice examples, because there are some good practice examples across the country where Black and ethnic minority people are engaged, and to highlight them and to develop case studies. To produce a series of recommendations and an action plan. Scope future funding opportunities for the sector, because we also believe that there's some missed opportunities with potential funding by omitting certain community groups. And one of our aims is to develop a EDI, Equality, Diversity, Inclusion toolkit for the sector, so that, and that toolkit, that training should be delivered by people of color. But so there, you know, and there's 9 stages, because, you know, there's a couple of things, other things I want to mention. There's 9 stages: scoping, policy and strategy review, review of practice and survey, quantitative field work, gap analysis, recommendations, action planning, and a following up, because we believe when we've done this research and we've got the findings and the recommendations, stage 2 will be supporting the implementation of them across the sector. I'm going to close my sharing because I'm going to add in a couple of other things that I've not put into that presentation. Part of my work has been to lobby. So one of the things, I'm working with a group in Leeds called Same Skies Think Tank to lobby our local mayor, again, because we've now got a combined mayor within our region, to get housing and community-led housing as part of her agenda and actually put some money into it. More recently, I was privileged to be asked to be part of the Bacon report into self-build and community-led housing, where Richard Bacon had been commissioned by Boris to look at it, and I managed to have him. I think one of his 3rd recommendations is the supporting of community-led housing, not just self-build, but community-led housing sector. And I'm doing some work now with Runnymede to profile and raise the profile of BME people within the sector and what we can bring to the sector and how we can help ensure there is diversity, inclusion, and a sense of equity going forward. My last statement is going to be that I am also very active in promoting homelessness, how community-led housing can act as a catalyst to solve homelessness rather than the local authority. An example in Leeds, I think we had something like, before pre-COVID, something like 120 to 180 people sleeping rough in Leeds. Rather than the local authority look at that, why can't community-led housing look at that issue? Because it's a small number. You know, the local authority has got something like 23,000 people on the housing waiting list. We, as the community-led sector, we can tackle these small issue groups. I'm also looking at ex-offenders. Ex-offenders, when they come out of prison, providing the crimes weren't of that situation, that they might not meet the criteria of community-led groups. Why can we not be looking at them as potential, how we can do projects around them? And finally, 2 more, ex-veterans, which you've heard me mention before. How can we, again, be the sector that's leading on that? The Green Deal, how can we not be the sector that's leading on that, retrofitting, stuff like that, bringing houses back into use? And young people. And when I talk young people, I'm saying young people under 25 years old, 18 to 25-year-olds. You know, one of the things I found by visiting young offenders institutes that 75% of all young people that are incarcerated are institutional children that have been through the care system, the foster system, and they're institutional, and they end up, but when they're 16, 17, they're just thrown out into the world and they don't make ends meet and they end up in criminal activity. So 75%, imagine if we could change the plight of 75% of young people going into prison because we give them an opportunity to, through community-led housing, to build a better future. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much for the invite to speak.
Thanks so much, Claude. I bet that was difficult to wrap up 30 years of work in that very short but comprehensive presentation. Thank you so much. Really, really interesting. I wasn't aware of the link between Community Lands Trust and civil rights movement. I'm definitely gonna look into that now. Wow, and the stuff about diversity and equity. We in Taipa, we lead on this initiative called These Not Words, where we're calling on the housing sector in Wales to end basically racial inequality and adopt anti-racism. And as part of that, we've done a survey of over 800 employees. So some very interesting findings and differences there between different groups, and the diversity, especially actually at the mid-management level, is very, very low. So only 0.6% of mid-managers in the participating organizations, which is about 30 organizations, are from Black and Asian and other ethnic minority groups. And we're also working, Hugh knows that, but we're also working with the refugee organization here, OWCH, and homelessness charities and housing justice. I think we've got someone here today to try and provide, develop kind of housing options for refugees leaving home office accommodation. Big challenges there for people, over 1,000 people in Wales. It's a big number, kind of made homeless and kind of nearly forced into homelessness really by the immigration system, really. So lots to learn from you. And I love what you said about nobody is hard to reach. People might have been easy to ignore. I don't think they are easy to ignore now. When someone says to us hard to reach, we turn it on its head and say need to reach. The rurality, that aspect, really, really interesting. We work across Wales as well, many rural areas there. But what we find, speaking to advocacy organisations, is that people in rural areas, can actually be, I think minority people can be more isolated. Not everybody has specific needs, but for those who have, or requirements, but for those who have, services can be, they're more difficult, less flexible sometimes on, say, specific cultural needs and so on. So much to learn here. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we're on to questions, and there were quite a few questions in the chat. Thank you very much for those who shared their thoughts and asked questions in the chat. So if I could ask all the speakers to unmute themselves now. I'll start with one that Maria, I think, has answered partly really in the chat, but it'd be good to discuss that really. What are your recommendations, Maria and others who have worked with housing associations? What are your recommendations for building co-production relationships?
I think they have to be group specific, and they are group specific. I mean, there's no point having a national campaign to get housing associations to engage. The outreach from a specific group to a housing association is something that requires sort of give on both sides. One of the things I thought I was doing when I came into the co-housing world about 25 years ago and started thinking about how to make it accessible to people who didn't have the equity to fund their own homes was reaching out to housing associations to remind them of where their origins had come from and how that they were originally grassroots organizations that responded to grassroots needs. And I thought I was doing them a favor by reminding them. But they didn't appear to take much notice because so many of them have got huge and bureaucratic and commercial, and there's not much difference between them and a big commercial business. One of the things I would suggest is an imperative now for housing associations to rethink how they relate to their tenants and to their prospective tenants is Grenfell. I think that is such a salutary lesson for the housing world. The way those people were disempowered, not listened to, and ended up losing their lives is something that housing associations need to seriously measure against the way they operate.
Thank you so much, Marie. And many of you would have watched the documentary, the recent documentary about Grenfell. I mean, it was both heartbreaking and energizing in terms of having a good look at how we actually talk and engage with people. That, you know, that meeting with the MP, for those of you who watched it, you know, suggesting that people ask their neighbours to be able to have a bath and wash was just, you know, degrading, really, isn't it? So much to learn from. I wonder whether others have any tips for good co-pro.
Susan, Jane, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first? You go on, Jane. You look like you're ready.
I'm just going to be very practical, actually, and say I think it was very important we had done some of the prior work in terms of providing a well-presented prospectus with a very clear outline of what we felt we wanted. And we'd done and with the help of Leeds Community Homes, had done a financial viability study that showed that this was a viable proposition. And so, in a sense, you know, we could say we were on equal terms in terms of that with their housing association, saying we know this could work. You know, the question is, we need you as an equal partner to help us along that journey. So, I think having some sense of your own own professional feel to it is really important in terms of perhaps you know, getting a housing association on board. So I just say that particularly. I also would say that as a priority need group, because I think that's probably how we're classified, that we meet the Section 106 conditions, and that's on big sites. For example, this site that we're being considered for, we're probably in the Section 106 situation. So we're actually, the housing association is keen to get us in, the council's keen to get us in, actually, because we will meet some of what they need to do the whole site development. So you've got to look at different angles, I think, about why and get and understand from their sitting in their shoes in a way what will also attract them to have us engage with them.
Thanks so much, Jane. Claude, I think you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah. I was just waiting to see if Susan was going to make a move. Yeah, for me, I think co-production can work. I think the groups need to really ensure that the partner that they're getting into bed with is doing it for the right reasons. There's lots of housing associations and lots of bodies out there that will utilize the situation to get themselves brownie points at a bigger level. You know, so they may engage with a project on a big site and say yes, and they'll use that publicity to draw down on funding that comes into their organization absolutely separate from the project. So you have to really look at it. You also have to look at, there is co-production in the delivery of the project, but maintaining the project over a number of years. When does the crow production finish? You've got, you know, because you'll get into bed with them. It's like getting married. You'll have a marriage, but not all marriages work out once you start living together. So the group really needs to look at the benefits for them. They, you know, housing associations, like was said earlier, like Maria was saying, have become, some of them have forgot their social interest. All they're interested is delivering units. They're not bothered. They'll deliver 500 units, and they often term people as tenants, clients. They have to start looking at people as stakeholders. They're stakeholders in this. When somebody's getting involved in building the house, it's not for a short term, because some of them housing associations will go on to another project in 3 years. They'll go on to another situation in a number of years, and you're in their exhaust, you're in their rear window, you know, at the end of the day, because maintaining your properties going forward the groups have to think about that. Sometimes groups can get caught up in, we just want to do this project, but the maintaining of them is actually a key feature, and they need to make sure that's written in. I did a project with a housing association, and we ended up with a shared ownership deal, which we thought was really good. The self-builder owns 25% of the property, and then they swung it on us, and the self-builders are responsible for maintaining the property. Whoops. So 25 years on, when a housing association, I'm just giving you an example, when a housing association builds normal properties, after 25 years, they have a responsibility to go in there, upgrade the bathrooms, upgrade the kitchens, because they've had 25 years of funding and collecting rent. Now, watch the deal, because if they say you're responsible for maintenance, in 25 years, your property is increased in value. They own a percentage, they own 75% of that increased value, but have you got a good deal? So I think it's important to read the small print within the partnership co-production and make sure it meets your needs in the long term. Don't just sign it because you want to get your project done. Sign it for the longevity of living in the property.
Thanks so much, Claude. Susan, did you want to add anything?
No, just I guess we're a group with a very big vision, and we, as well as heeding what Claude's saying, we also recognise that we will have to make some compromises along the way, and it's deciding where our red lines are.
Yeah, so there's a lot there about kind of knowing your value, standing your ground, and compromise as well. And I think what you talked about kind of partly answers really the question that Hugh posed, which is what have the drivers been for housing associations to get involved with the work of the groups you represent, because bringing ourselves on board with these schemes in Wales is a priority here in Wales. Anything else that you'd like to add on those drivers? No, okay. I think what you shared is a very some very, very practical ways of
I think if I could just
drivers. Yes, go ahead.
London and Quadrant, who's working with the LOLT group, has made very good efforts to be to include them and to empower them and to listen to them. And there's a very good sense of equal partnership there. That's one organization, and that's huge and long-standing as well. So, obviously not everybody at the organization will be in tune with that, generally isn't. In Birmingham, Housing 21 is embarking on 10 co-housing projects. Now, I think that's admirable in the sense that they have all the knowledge, the finance, and the drive to get it achieved, whereas so many co-housing groups fail for lack of all that. And they are very well intentioned, and they are trying to empower groups in the city who are deprived from the BAME groups, etc. there is a slight risk, a risk, I think, that in the end, they'll just do what they normally do and rebrand it as co-housing, community-led housing. But I hope not. I'm very hopeful that they will avoid that.
Absolutely. Great thoughts, Maria. Thanks very much, all. We haven't got much time left, but there was one question there from Kerry, I think. Slightly challenging, given the lack of diversity in the current group. I think that was for Maria. How are you safeguarding against potential bias, stopping you widening the diversity in the future? I know that you started responding, Maria, in the chat, but any thoughts on that, and thoughts from others would be welcome as well.
I think the group is really conscious that it is white, although, as I tried to stress at the end, it is actually very diverse in different ways. It's not just BAME that makes up diversity. But one of the things that I think was active with our group, I mean, we started in 1998 and they didn't move in until 2016. Whoa. And, you know, people died on the way. Hundreds of women came through the group. We couldn't get anywhere, and local authorities in London weren't listening, weren't interested, blah blah blah, all kinds of things. But there's also a generational thing. We had a trainer on diversity once, who a black woman, in fact, and she said, "Stop worrying so much about being white," because she said, you know, my generation, in fact, I'll put my name down, my generation would love to come into this sort of arrangement. She said, you can forget my mother. She'll never come near this because she just won't. And she was from an Afro-Caribbean background. South Asian, Indian, Pakistani women who are in their 80s or 70s also would, on the whole, are very reluctant to move anywhere that would suggest that their families are not looking after them. Came across an example of this just a few days ago, where it was reported that some sort of housing body was trying to attract South Asian women into their housing scheme, a new scheme. And some of those women were sharing bedrooms with their grandchildren and commuting between one daughter and one son and another. Didn't even have rooms of their own, but were living in, from, you know, at one stage they were living with one grandchild, another stage living with another grandchild, sharing a bedroom, because of the stigma that was attached to looking as if their families weren't looking after them. So it's a generational thing that will grow out, I think. People in their 80s, 70s and 80s, 90s are kind of locked into those sorts of feelings often. So, yeah, I think that's an issue to take aboard. It is a generational thing that has probably already grown out a bit. And the next thing to say is that the LOLT group, who were more certain than we ever were that they would, because we'd done it, that they could achieve it, I think, put a stop to their recruitment at a certain point and said, okay, we are not going to recruit any more white women until we get to a certain balance with BAME groups. And they did that. And they are a very well mixed group now. I think we could have done that, but I don't think we thought that we would ever achieve anything in the first place, and didn't have the confidence to halt recruitment and redirect it. But if we were starting today, we would.
Yeah, so much of it, I suppose, is about the decisions and the groups you probably involved in the beginning, and how long it takes as well to develop it. I wonder whether anyone else would have any kind of final thought on that. Claude, perhaps?
Well, I'll come in, Susan. I'll jump in this time and you can come in after me. Number one, I think the 70s and 80s, there's been a lot of learning for the British establishment, the British society, the British community on perceptions. And I think you know, there's a lot, and when I do my equality, diversity, and inclusion training for different groups, I say there are some unconscious biases. Everybody has unconscious biases, and them unconscious biases can play a role in people's perception on what other people think. One of the biggest co-housing stroke cooperative projects in the UK is a Bangladeshi project in Leicester, made up of Bangladeshi women. It's a massive project, over 20. Martin Fields is always talking about it. And I think there is preconceived conceptions about people that we have to dismiss. I think as history has revealed itself, we've started to realize that you can give opportunities to all kinds of people and they can be part of the same grouping. So I think that, you know, I often say many of us were born in the Barney Rubble and Fred Flintstone age era. We were born, you know, in the 60s, 70s when it was the old style. And now we're living in the Matrix, the Neo era, where we have social media and all these other things that can help us engage across groups. I do agree that the older people in all communities may not engage. Some will. But I think going forward, we have to look at the lessons of the past. And the lessons show you that, like I said, and I like the term need to reach, where I said hard to reach or easy to ignore. I like that term, need to reach. I think, you know, sometimes we need to put down what we believe and get to know what and find out, be willing to learn, be willing to reach out, be willing to listen. I think times have changed, and I think, you know, we can have intergenerational, inter-ethnicity, all the mix of groups. I think, you know, I think the future is great as long as we have open minds and not keep commenting on how it used to be, but be willing to do things in the future different.
Absolutely, and I think you know, you've all shared examples of some fantastic projects and examples of how you, as well, you know, when you develop this, you probably don't have that many resources or time or capacity, and the sort of lessons that you learn. I bet there are a lot of things that, you know, after working on it for many years, you think you'd have done differently as well. Thank you so much. We haven't got much time. We've run over time. Apologies. That's my chairing as well, but it's just so important and so interesting. I think what really stands out to me is that you know, the groups that you're working with in many ways might be very different, have specific needs. And you might be focusing on that, but there's really something that I think, you know, unites you all, which is the absolute faith and vision of the individuals behind these projects. And inequality and diversity, inclusion, whatever that means, the work that we do, we quite often talk about hope for change. But what we really see in what you've done is not hope, it is faith and determination. And doing stuff now rather than waiting for something to change in the future, because we know that what the future holds, but we know who holds the future as well, and it's us, and it's you and people like you. So you know, hats off to you. Lots of learning today. I'm sure there's much more information that can be shared about this project. I'm hoping that you can share this recording far and wide, Wells Co-op and Hugh and people working on community creating homes. Lots to learn. There's so many more projects out there, like some names that I've heard you mentioned. Definitely going to have a look at it. And I hope you can all take learning and inspiration really from what has been shared here today. Thank you so much to Wells Co-op for organising, and thank you so much to all the speakers for taking their time really to share what they've done with us today. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Brilliant session. And thanks a million, Alicia, for such energetic and enthusiastic sharing. Much appreciated.
Despite being interrupted by my little ones, I'm not sure that it's been them. I was so grateful it was when I wasn't speaking. I've spilt my drink.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, folks. Cheerio.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Great to